do that. There we go. Always an important one to do. So yeah, very welcome guys to a third webinar in our series, Reimagining Sustainable Development, Achieving Resilient Communities. We're joined today by Angus Mitchell, who is Technology Development Lead at EWB Australia. And he's going to be discussing EWB Australia's work with First Nations and the technology development approach that they use to work collaboratively with First Nations peoples. This approach really centers priorities of people in the communities themselves and is moving away from kind of imposing dominant preconceived notions that non-Indigenous people may have of development or innovation. Something kind of new and quite different for a lot of engineering professionals, as I think Angus would say himself. So very excited to hear from him, and really looking forward to your questions at the end for Angus. Hopefully we can have a lively Q&A. I know we've got people from different backgrounds kind of joining us today. So yeah, hopefully you'll have some comments, reflections and questions to share. So I'll pass over now to Angus. Thanks a million, Angus. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Emma. And yeah, thanks everyone for having me. It's really exciting to join you from across the world. I'll just firstly say a little bit of an apologies. I'm probably used to talking to Australians a lot, so my hopefully my accent won't be too hard to understand, and I won't speak too fast or too mumbly. The other one is that I am calling from the middle of the night, and I have had my second COVID vaccination today, which is awesome finally, but makes me a little bit hazy too. So yeah, I'll just kick off now. So yeah, today I'm talking about kind of hopefully how we're reframing sustainable development at Engineers Without Borders Australia, and kind of our new approaches that we're trying to implement, that we've kind of developed over the last say 13 years of being an organization. But just to start off, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. So this will provide a little bit of useful information, hopefully, to everybody. So in Australia, we do this thing called an acknowledgement of country when we do run any event, even online events. And it's just to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're coming in from. So this map here is a First Nations language group map of Australia. And it kind of roughly corresponds with maybe what you would call like indigenous clans or nations of Australia. So I am zooming in from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country in Canberra, the capital of Australia. And I'd just like to acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging of Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. And also Engineers Without Borders Australia's head office is based in Melbourne, which is on Wurundjeri country. And we also work across like a huge amount of First Nations going forward. Just a few that from projects I'm working with includes Kuku-Yalanji up in kind of North Queensland, Lama Lama in Cape York, also Yolngu in Arnhem Land. So yeah, hopefully that today you'll learn a little bit more about kind of First Nations in Australia and how we're trying to kind of reframe maybe some of the development work we're doing in Australia. So yeah, first I might just talk a little bit about my background, who I am, how I've come to be here. I'll talk a little bit about Engineers Without Borders Australia, the stuff that we do. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of our approach to technology development, as I'm the technology development lead. And then I'll finally just talk a little bit about the impact that we're having on country locally in Australia, with a few case studies. So yeah, I am trained as a mechatronic engineer in Sydney, Australia. And I've kind of been around Engineers Without Borders Australia for a long time, since I was a student, maybe since about 8 years ago. I did a field placement in 2019 with Engineers Without Borders Australia. You can see me somewhere there in that photo if you look really hard, where I was working to kind of co-design agricultural technologies with people with disabilities. I since then have been working as a technology development lead, kind of supporting our 25 or so staff across 4 countries to implement like sustainable and inclusive technology design practices in all of the programs that we run. So Engineers Without Borders Australia is headquartered in Australia, in Melbourne, but we have offices in 3 other countries, in Vanuatu, in Timor-Leste, and in Cambodia. We have around like 25 staff, as I said, and all together at the moment working on around 20 different technology development projects. And so that spans from kind of water and sanitation, housing and infrastructure, agricultural technology, as I said, energy. So we work in a lot of different different sectors or through different engineering disciplines. Our approach is kind of to work, not approach, but our framework for impact at Engineers Without Borders is to kind of work across these 3 pillars of kind of education and mobilization. We have like a network of thousands of volunteers and members in Australia. And we also have tens of thousands of university students who go through a kind of education program. We also kind of work on design and scale of humanitarian technologies or appropriate technologies, which is the work that I'm directly involved in. And we also have like kind of a research and influence kind of agenda. And our kind of final goal at Engineers Without Borders Australia is this kind of a world where technology can benefit all. And that really talks to kind of inclusion of kind of a range of different like worldviews and visions for the future in the technology that we design. So in order to kind of achieve this, we kind of recognize that we need to have this kind of inclusive technology development approach. So like a technology development approach is kind of this combination of kind of the design like tools we use, the principles that guide our work, the process we work through, and then this and kind of the way that we collaborate with kind of users and other stakeholders in the design. Probably very familiar with that. And so we have kind of our own process that we've developed that's kind of based on a lot of this kind of participatory design, collaborative design, scholarship in practice. So I won't spend too much time on this because it might be a little bit not as interesting as some other stuff, but yeah, it kind of this is our process and it kind of encourages us to work from like left to right through this process. We have like 2 kind of simultaneous streams where we're thinking about how we design the technology in the bottom, but also how we work on the enabling environment around that technology that makes it sustainable, that makes it culturally appropriate, that makes it be able to have impact at scale. Our guiding principles are kind of similarly kind of come out of like evidence informed out of the literature, and also kind of through a lot of the practical like practitioner learnings through Engineers Without Borders staff. Yeah, the other part of that kind of approach for us is this kind of collaboration style. So a few of you might know or heard of terms like co-design or human-centered design or community-led co-production. So we kind of don't have a specific one of these that we kind of work through. This kind of our technology development approaches kind of encourages our staff and people who use it to think about kind of how we want, what kinds of interactions we want to have with our communities. And that kind of informs what style we will use. It's not kind of one that is the kind of the best type of collaboration style. And but yeah, each one has different characteristics and kind of level of engagement with different types of stakeholders. So yeah, I might just talk a little bit about a case study that I am leading at the moment in Australia. So we are having this kind of agenda over the next till 2030, over the next kind of 9 years, to kind of double down on our impact with First Nations communities locally here in Australia. And so that means exploring a lot more opportunities to work with different communities and design innovative technology that is going to support their agenda. So just a little bit of background on this project is that Australia is a really big place, and our history of environmental management over the last maybe 230 years is very poor. So we have, as a lot of you may have heard, we have a big problem with kind of what we call bushfires, kind of wildfires, that are a huge contributor to global warming, and lead to losses of thousands of houses every year, and the displacement of thousands of people. But Australia has kind of a traditional fire management program that has been utilised here for over 20,000 years. And so indigenous ranger programs are an emerging way that Australia is kind of engaging with indigenous knowledge, employing indigenous people, and taking a kind of strength-based approach to indigenous development at the same time, to look at how we can provide indigenous livelihoods, but also heal the environment. One second. So we are working on a project with the Centre for Appropriate Technology, who's an Indigenous owned engineering services provider, who work in kind of really remote and kind of rural northern central Australia. And there's this, they've identified this kind of challenge with the communities they work with, that Indigenous rangers who work in these really remote locations and manage, like, I think it is over 50%, 51% of Australia's landmass, don't often have access to electricity where they need it for using tools, having kind of electricity for food refrigeration or lighting. So the other part of this challenge is that because these groups move across such a vast swath of Australia, the use of kind of fixed infrastructure, like you can see in this picture here, isn't technically feasible, because we can't install fixed solar or fixed renewables at like every single location across Australia where different groups might move. So we've kind of developing this technology that we're calling the kind of solar trailer portable energy system, where we'll be able to provide around 10 kilowatt hours of electricity to Indigenous rangers per day. And in some kind of a really robust package that doesn't exist currently on the market. So yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about how like we use our technology development approach in this project, and maybe draw out a few of those elements of the technology development approach I talked about earlier. So for us, this project kind of sits in a human-centered design space, which means that we're not so much working every day with the users to kind of design the technology, and that's largely due to the kind of the highly remote nature of this project. It's due to kind of cultural differences and sensitivities, and it's also due to the kind of the knowledge, the current kind of concentration of engineering and electrical expertise within kind of our urban centres in Australia. The kind of enabling environment side of this project is that we're working with a bunch of Indigenous-led organisations, including Indigenous rangering groups, to advocate for an increase, kind of a sustainment and increase of kind of funding for Indigenous ranger groups. This project is kind of sustainable because Indigenous ranger groups are being paid by the government, and also through kind of carbon credit markets to sustainably manage the environment. And yeah, just kind of like one of the design kind of thinking tools that has been really useful for me in this project has been this kind of one what we call values tension, which is kind of a way of exploring different values we have in the project and how they might come into conflict sometimes. So as I spoke about with the human-centered design choice of that collaboration style, there's this kind of tension sometimes between trying to have this two-way knowledge sharing and collaboration with communities, and then also be culturally appropriate. And in this case, those two are a little bit in conflict because we don't always have the capacity to be culturally appropriate in Australia as kind of settler engineers who aren't familiar with some of these contexts. So actually doing a lot of work ourselves in urban centres and coming up with a really robust design, which is what I'm doing at the moment, is a more appropriate way of going than kind of going this intensive kind of collaborative design methodology. And yeah, the other kind of tension there is in the project is kind of looking at do we optimize design for a particular ranger group or a particular community in kind of a particular geographical area, or are we looking at this kind of scalable design that can go across the whole of remote Australia, but also potentially other countries? This is always kind of a big tension in a lot of the projects we work with, because we really want to have this scalable impact. We really want technologies to be available to multiple communities across the countries we work, but we also always want to make sure that they're really tailored also and really bespoke to the communities we work with. The other huge part of the kind of First Nations work that we are doing and kind of trying to double down on over the next few years is this what we call engineering on country. Country in Australia is a word that is not just about kind of the nation of Australia, but it's a word to kind of reference the kind of the human and non-human, the spiritual, the not spiritual, kind of the and physical kind of aspects of a place as they're understood by Indigenous communities here. So when we say engineering on country, we mean engineering with a respect for Indigenous knowledge of place. So yeah, this program is where we kind of, we partner with engineering consultancies in Australia. So we partner with people like Arup and Oricon, and let's say GHD, these kind of bigger engineering consultancies that some of you might work for or heard of. And we, these companies in Australia, they kind of provide pro bono support, and we act as a broker between indigenous communities and indigenous-led organizations who are looking for engineering support. So yeah, an example that is is emerging at the moment is a project called our RAWA School Project, where we're looking to do a school upgrade, build a bunch of sporting facilities and a bunch of water access for an Aboriginal school in a remote location. So yeah, this program is kind of has been going for many years. We kind of have, at the moment, we have about 6 different infrastructure projects ongoing, and we're kind of always adding more. And I think the aim this year is for about 20 collaborations with different First Nations communities and organizations. So this is also really another really exciting pathway for impact for us. So it's all about kind of connecting the communities who need support and with these kind of pro bono, the companies who are able to provide it, and making sure that it's done in a really respectful way that centers community needs and kind of community values. So yeah, I think that's all from me today. Yeah, just to thank a few people here who've been kind of involved with the development of this program so far. And yeah, I'd just like to open up to questions and discussion, I suppose.
Thanks so much, Angus. Really interesting to hear about the work you're doing there. I see someone, Carol, you're multitasking there with how you're washing. Very good. Well, I might, if anyone actually, well, first of all, to throw it out to anyone there, if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask Angus, anything that occurs to anyone at the moment. If not, there's something definitely that I'd be interested in asking myself. But yeah, is there anyone from the audience there that would like to ask any questions? Oh, no worries, Sinead. Yeah. Thanks very much for joining. Okay, so from Nagarjan, is there a water problem in Australia?
Yes, there are so many water problems in Australia. Yeah, I suppose I should have given like a better overview of Australian history. So like in Australia, we're obviously a colonized country. So it means like British came here and sent all the kind of convicts here, like in 1788 and beginning 1788. And kind of a lot of research that's emerging is showing that kind of a lot of practices here were actually really sustainable and really desirable in what we're probably working towards now. And that's including kind of water management and water kind of provision and sustainment kind of practices. Yeah, there's a huge issue with water. I think Australia is seen as it's kind of the driest continent in the world other than Antarctica. So yeah, we have a huge issue with water, especially kind of with use of water for agriculture, and yeah, the lack of kind of environmental water that's retained for environmental flows, we call them, because a lot of our key rivers are kind of dammed and water is used for kind of industry or agriculture or other things. So yeah, huge issue. I think yeah, sorry, I probably talk too much about this, but yeah, for me, this reframing development is as much around kind of working locally on local challenges as it is about kind of realizing that we actually have these challenges locally, and what we're doing in Australia in the mainstream doesn't necessarily reflect best practice or reflect sustainable development. So it's kind of that turning that critique or that lens for changing, for global change locally, before we start or simultaneously while we start taking that lens internationally.
Great, thanks, Angus. Any other questions, guys, from the audience? If there's a lull at the moment, I might, oh, sorry, something has popped up here from Rashida. How have the projects been received from the end user perspective? Yeah, really important question. Thank you, Rashida.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I feel like in the projects I've worked in, end users are typically the most consulted, the most involved. So, for example, it's probably easy to talk about projects that are completed. So, yeah, the project that I talked about a little bit at the start, they're kind of called the Agri Lab, which is a kind of co-design for agricultural technologies project. Yeah, it was really well received. I think like participants like really in the program really loved just like being involved. So like it's, so I should describe more like what happened. So it's kind of so we take this kind of we were using like this kind of collaborative design approach, which really means that we kind of get together with end users and we explore like what challenges are in culturally appropriate ways, obviously, and in local languages. We explore what the problems are. We explore like what potential solutions could be, and then we actually work together to design solutions. So we actually have a lot of kind of spend a lot of time with kind of wood and with like steel, kind of doing prototyping together with end users. And then yeah, we have this kind of this whole technology development approach and process, and kind of at the moment, a lot of the projects that I kind of started working with communities in 2019 are kind of at the stage where we have kind of dozens of technologies sitting with dozens of users, and we're kind of continuing that iterative design process, and we're continuing to kind of scale up through kind of organically through users being able to build the technology themselves. So yeah, and one of the projects that I'm working on, we kind of designed like a water pumping solution for people with disabilities for agricultural water. And yeah, I think we got so far in the last survey was kind of 90% of people found it really useful. I think people are saving on average kind of 30 minutes of time every day, and being able to produce like a wider variety of crops, and also kind of increase their income from agriculture to a quite significant level. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Angus. Yeah, I think it's really interesting just to hear about the the interaction process throughout, and really interesting the point that you touched on, which very honest again, important to kind of like, yeah, to look at around sort of values tension, and that's something that's going to come up in any collaborative process and community process, but kind of how you work through and how you work and do that joint prototyping is, yeah, really interesting to hear about. So thank you, and I hope that answers your question there, Rashida. But yeah, maybe just building on that, I would just ask, what would you say, Angus, is what do you think that non-Indigenous engineers could, I mean, there's obviously many things, but what do you think perhaps is really a value that non-Indigenous engineers could take from Indigenous knowledge systems? And you talked there about the example of kind of in term, that I was just really struck by the quote that was on that slide that you had, that it's the best fire management system in the world, led by Indigenous people, for thousands of years before settlers came. What would you think are kind of key tenets of the Indigenous knowledge system, or kind of how Indigenous people approach sort of working with the land that engineers could perhaps learn from? Conscious as well, and I started to be asking you this question on what's maybe 2 a.m. in the morning, so I do apologize. But yeah, just any area and things you've learned kind of in the process yourself.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's something that I'm trying to figure out. And yeah, I think a key thing is kind of distinguishing this like learning about, or learning about indigenous knowledge, or learning from kind of indigenous knowledge. And I think like what we should be doing is maybe learning from indigenous knowledge, which means kind of looking at indigenous knowledge and talking with indigenous people, and utilizing the kind of principles and the protocols behind that knowledge to inform our own development practice and to inform our own development, but kind of, you know, coming up with a new kind of a new synthesis there, rather than kind of a rote application. I think it's really important to acknowledge that kind of indigenous, like, yeah, at least in this context, indigenous peoples have been kind of innovating their own knowledge and kind of transforming it and morphing it so much through time, through an ice age in Australia. So through a time of great climate change, and kind of through times of disaster, and they've kind of been able to retain kind of culture and retain story and retain knowledge through that whole process. So I think it's it's clear that we need to kind of we need to keep that kind of knowledge transition and kind of and formation happening. I think the other one, yeah, I think you can look at indigenous knowledges, at least in Australia, and say like there's some aspects like holistic thinking or pattern thinking, or kind of notions of respect. And they're these kind of like abstract values that we like to pull out of indigenous knowledges. And yeah, I'm really interested not so much in those kind of abstract values that we kind of conceptualize out of them, as much as kind of looking at the protocols, much more on a protocol level. So which really gives us some kind of practical tools that we can use. So whether that's protocols for acknowledging what we call acknowledging country in Australia, whether it's protocols for how we interact with others, or how we interact with the technology that we're designing or using. I think that's another really great way. And yeah, hopefully I'm kind of, as we were talking about before, Emma, I'm kind of doing this research. I'm kind of undertaking some PhD research too at the moment, where we're kind of looking at how non-Indigenous engineers can adopt these, can like decolonize our practice, and kind of what we can learn from Indigenous knowledges in Australia, and what that means for humanitarian engineering specifically.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really interesting to look at it like protocols, like how it really is practically applied then. Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of, okay, the values, how does that translate into practice and protocols? Yeah, really interesting. I think something, yeah, it would be great to see, yeah, I suppose move certainly around the world in terms of, you know, and I suppose as we're discussing this, you know, and COP is happening, you know, I think we're all conscious of the sort of paradigms there, and you know, and discussions. And yeah, it seems just very interesting to explore just totally different ways of working, as you say, in protocols, and how, you know, how you work with people on land. But yeah, so thank you so much, Angus, for that. Are there any last questions or comments, guys, before we wrap up there?
I'll just say on the note with COP, I'll say sorry. I'll just say I'm deeply sorry for our our Prime Minister's contribution. It's pretty terrible. I've been watching a whole host of international delegates not want to shake his hand or have anything to do with him, because we're not committing to net zero by 2030. So it's quite embarrassing to see what's going on at the moment.
Right, we're certainly not personally responsible, I suppose. Yeah, it could be a moment, maybe it catalyzes Australians as well to really pressure. But I mean, for all of us, really, as countries, in particular high income countries, it's really, you know, not all what's being said and pacts agreed, but what happens now, you know, really, and next is really key. So I think, you know, yeah, time time will tell, as we're saying. But yeah, guys, if there aren't any other questions or comments at the moment, we'll wrap up there now. So thank you so much for joining, and yeah, huge thanks to Angus for his time and contribution today. If any of you would like to Gregory says maybe a more honest politician than most. Very good, thank you, Gregory. Yeah, indeed, yeah, in some cases. Well, I won't mention anything. Actually, this is being recorded, but yeah, yeah. If any of you perhaps would like to chat more to Angus, I'm sure he'd be very happy to maybe talk with you. So if you'd like, feel free to reach out to me, and I can certainly connect you with Angus. But if not, enjoy the rest of the day wherever you guys are in the world, and we'll look forward to hopefully being joined by in 2 weeks' time, where we're going to be joined by 2 staff from Self-Organized Architecture, who will be talking about the transformative potential of community-led housing. So we hope you can join us for that. That'll be Tom O'Donnell and Colin MacDonald. Lots of Donalds here in Ireland. Cool. So we'll look forward to hopefully meeting you again then in the virtual space, and take care, guys, till then. All the best. Bye.